Fair use disclaimer. I do not own any of these clips within this video, nor do I own any of the music. I only wish to voice my opinions about this movie, and if I'm lucky, to inspire and ultimately teach any of my viewers a concept that they never thought of before. If you haven't watched this movie before, I encourage you to do so, and develop your own opinions about this movie, and then come back to this video and see where you disagree, agree, and/or develop new ideas. Spoiler warning, for any of you who haven't watched this movie before, or who wish to watch this movie. Also, it may be in your best interest to watch this video, if you're old enough, of course. This video will help you to understand some of the terms that I use within this video, such as perfection, intelligence, life, and death. I didn't want to include it into this video due to it being long enough already, and will probably touch on the terms with little to no detail. Without further ado, let's delve deeper into our thoughts. Wreck-It Ralph, a movie created by Disney in 2012, a movie that is beloved by both critics and fans alike, as it is praised for its good storytelling, well-crafted characters, its unique take on games, and of course, its praiseworthy message that is within the morals of the story. It is a well-crafted movie that implements the world of gaming, computer science, and oddly enough, philosophy. Yeah, philosophy, something that you wouldn't really expect from a kids movie, but hey, there it is. But don't worry, I'll explain why Wreck-It Ralph contains philosophical ideas that mesh quite well with computer science, gaming, and even the real world. Before we do so, I first must give you a comprehensive summary with key points that I will expand upon later on in this video. Every time I mention a key point, I will display this puzzle piece right here for those of you who are interested. Wreck-It Ralph, a movie that follows a video game character by the name of Ralph, who is tasked with the role of being the bad guy by destroying the Nicelanders' apartment building. However, Fix-It Felix Jr. is tasked with the role of fixing the building by using his magic hammer that allows him to fix the broken objects, thus giving him his epithet of Fix-It. Once the player successfully controls Felix by maneuvering past all the obstacles while simultaneously fixing the building, he is declared the victor and is able to defeat Ralph by throwing him off the building. After 30 years of Ralph being the loser and the villain, he becomes unhappy with his life and his situation due to the lack of appreciation and villainization that he receives from the Nicelanders. This causes him to go to a bad guy therapy group where he expresses his unresolved issues and his desire to be the good guy of the game, even if it means going turbo. Yet he is given wise advice by Clyde the Ghost and is given a reflective affirmation to help him overcome his desires. Despite this, he leaves therapy with unresolved issues as he enters the transit station that takes the form of a power strip. This is where the audience learns of the respawn system, that if a video game character dies in another game, they are essentially deleted forever and cannot respawn. Ralph returns to his game, but is unable to overcome his rut and is compelled to attend the 30th anniversary of Wreck-It Ralph. But when he arrives, he is met with disgust. He quickly picks up on their attitude towards him, but doesn't make a scene out of the situation. Not until he sees the cake in the portrayal of his character as the villainous monster. This causes him to crash out as he argues with the apartment owner and is ultimately challenged by him to prove them wrong by obtaining a medal that will prove to them that he is not a bad guy. With that said, he travels to a game called Hero's Duty and is seeking to obtain the Medal of Heroes. This, however, leaves the game of Wreck-It Ralph in complete disarray and inoperable as Felix is unable to accomplish his goal due to Ralph not fulfilling his role. This causes the owner to put them out of commission due to the game malfunctioning. In response, Felix chases after Ralph, who is able to obtain the medal, but is also clumsy and awakens the cybugs from within the game. And through a series of events, he is shot out of the tower and into another game called Sugar Rush with a passenger cybug. After the crash landing, he finds a cybug nowhere in sight and the medal hanging from a candy cane tree. But before he can retrieve the medal, he is bested by Vanellope, who takes the medal and uses it to enter the upcoming race. However, King Candy and the other racers do not accept her, as she is a glitch. With that said, the other racers decide to destroy her race car. Yet Ralph was able to save her from further harm by fending them off and is even convinced to help her acquire another race car. For if she wins, then she will be given a medal and is willing to give it back to him. As for Sergeant Callahan, she is compelled to stop the cybugs in their need to consume any and all material things. She is accompanied by Felix, who insists on helping her, as he sees it as his duty to fix the carnage left behind Ralph, and ultimately deter him from going turbo. Initially, Callahan doesn't know what going turbo means until Felix explains the story of Turbo and how he destroyed 2 arcade games by chasing his own vanity. For he wished to be the center of the attention, even if it meant going to another game to steal the spotlight. This ended up costing both of the games to have their plugs pulled due to the video games malfunctioning. Meanwhile, Ralph and Vanellope break into the castle and build their own race car that they then use to escape. This causes King Candy to enter the program that contains all the code within the game. This allows him to retrieve the Medal of Heroes, which he uses to convince Ralph to destroy the race car, so that he can ultimately save Vanellope from her own demise. For if she completes the race, she will become part of the roster, and when she glitches, the owner will see that this is a malfunction. This will cause him to unplug the game and end up killing her, as she will not be able to escape due to her being a glitch. With that said, Ralph destroys the race car and leaves Sugar Rush in shame. Felix, on the other hand, is captured and is sitting in jail due to his association to Ralph. As for Ralph, he returns to his game where he learns the cost of going turbo. He may have won the challenge, but at the cost of making his colleagues homeless, imprisoning a good man, dooming Sugar Rush, destroying his relationship with Vanellope, and allowing his game to be unplugged. In a fit of frustration, he throws his medal at the screen where he gains insight into the truth of who Vanellope is. With that said, he goes back to Sugar Rush, where he interrogates Sour Bill and learns of King Candy's true intentions to keep Vanellope from reintegrating back into her game. However, he has no idea why he is doing this, for their memories are locked up. Ralph breaks Felix out of prison and convinces him to fix the race car. With the car fixed, Ralph breaks Vanellope out of prison and they manage to get her into the race. Yet the race is compromised by the cybugs that have multiplied and are now seeking to destroy everything in the game. This, however, does not stop Vanellope from finishing the race and even catching up to King Candy, who is now dead set on stopping her. But when she grabs his scepter, she reveals the truth with her glitch. For King Candy is just a disguise for Turbo that he uses to enact his authority on a game that he had usurped. However, Vanellope uses her glitch to get out of the situation and avoid her demise while taking the lead, and when Turbo tries to catch up, he is swallowed up by a cybug. As for Vanellope, she is unable to finish the race due to the track being destroyed by the cybugs. With no other options, they must vacate the game, but at last, Vanellope is unable to do so, due to her being a glitch, and is doomed to die by the cybugs. That is, until Ralph decides to be a hero by going to the Diatola Mountain and using the Mentos to create a hot liquid light beacon. However, he is thwarted by Turbo, who is fused with the cybug that ate him, and does his best to stop him. But Ralph is able to beat him and do a heroic sacrifice that allowed him to create a light beacon that is used to eradicate all the cybugs, including the abomination that Turbo formed into. Except Vanellope uses her glitch to save Ralph from his demise. In the end, Ralph sets things right and discovers what it means to truly be happy. So these will be the major points that I will be discussing over the course of this video. But before we delve deeper into these major points, we need to go over some basic terms that we will be using throughout the rest of this video, and will make it easier to understand. You may recognize them from Plato's theories of forms, terms such as the shadow, the form, the essence, the function, and the purpose. In order to explain these terms efficiently, I will be drawing an example from the main character of Ratatouille. Remy himself is a shadow, an individual who takes on the form of a rat, the ideal of a rat, just like the rest of his rat mischief. However, his essence is that of a chef, despite his limited form. His function is to cook food, given that his essence is that of a chef, and yet his ability to cook efficiently is based upon his form, whether it be beneficial or a hindrance. And his purpose as a chef is to feed the body and soul with his cooking. Notice, however, his purpose is not dictated by his function or his essence, rather it is guided by something else. But I'll get into that later. and it is up to the individual to decide his purpose. These are the basic terms that I will be using throughout this video. So if you want to familiarize yourself with these concepts, feel free to do so by either re-watching this section or learning about Plato's theories of form. At the start of the movie, we are given the moral of the story, when the bad guys end their therapy session with an affirmation that they use to remind themselves of their role within this universe. The affirmation goes like this: I'm bad, and that's good. I will never be good, and that's not bad. There's no one I'd rather be than me. So what does this mean, and how does this collection of confusing sentences help us to understand the moral of the story? Well, it's quite clear that we need to understand the two words at play, bad and good, except there's one problem. The words bad and good each have two separate meanings and give way to a more complex lesson at play. But before we can discover the moral of the story, we must understand these two concepts. Two concepts that operate within their own respective spectrum and contain two opposing poles that just so happen to share the same word, but with two different meanings. Those poles being bad and good. Now then, the first spectrum operates within the confines of morality. Morality in the sense of bad guys versus good guys, right versus wrong, virtue versus evil. Those that are morally bad commit acts of evil that negatively affect the world around them by going down a path that is wrong, while a good guy is able to perform acts of virtue that make the world better by choosing to do the right deed. Now, one must remember that no one person is entirely good or bad. Rather, they are simply a combination of the two, and that their actions that they choose to do is what determines where they lie in this spectrum of morality. As for the other spectrum, it is based on the concept of quality, both poor and excellent quality, or better yet, ugliness and beauty. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to this idea of bad versus good equating to poor versus excellent, and their extremes being that of imperfection versus perfection. If a shovel has a spade made of ice with a shaft made of a pool noodle and a handle made of thorns, one would say that this particular shovel is poor due to its inability to perform its function of transferring a solid substance from one end to another. Meanwhile, a shovel with an iron spade with a thick wooden shaft and a sturdy metal handle would be a great shovel, as it is better at performing this particular function that a shovel performs. The quality of every tool, every occupation, every living organism, and every person within this universe is defined by their ability to perform their function. And just like any spectrum, it has a range from which it lies on the scale between bad and good. So now that we know what bad and good mean, let's replace the words with their alternative meanings so that we can make sense of this affirmation. Let's replace I'm bad with I'm imperfect, and that's good with that's alright. And instead of I will never be good, replace it with I will never be perfect, and then replace that's not bad with that's not wrong. So altogether it comes out to say, I'm imperfect, and that's alright. I will never be perfect, and that's not wrong. There is no one I'd rather be than me. An affirmation that is essentially telling the audience it's okay that we are not perfect, as long as we accept who we are. But what does that last part mean? What does it mean to ultimately accept who we are? In the world of Wreck-It Ralph, the characters live inside a video game with rules and codes that dictate what they can and cannot do. In a sense, they live in a program. How fitting, considering that the essence of a video game is just that, a program. And what is a program if it's not just a set of functions that work together to make a world operate according to its laws? Laws that are based on the codes that they are given. And as a result, the program itself has its own overarching goal that needs to be fulfilled in order to be completed. But what does this all mean? Well, in order to explain this, I'm going to need to use a comparison. In biology, the most basic building blocks of a honeybee, besides their atoms, are the nucleotides. These nucleotides combine together in order to create their life code, if you will, their DNA. Now, DNA is essentially the blueprint that dictates the basis of their physical form and their cognitive processing. This ultimately builds the form of a honeybee and determines the amount of eyes it will have, how many wings it will produce, the number of legs it will possess, so on and so forth. But it doesn't stop there, for the epigenetics of its DNA will also tell the honeybee how it should behave, its essence if you will, all in accordance with the code that it has developed from its environment. After all bees are not the same. Some honeybees are drones, while others are workers. And then of course there is the queen. All similar in form but different in terms of essence. Now a collection of honeybees is a swarm of bees that seeks to create a community with certain objectives or functions, one being to create honey. Now then, in computer science it contains a similar structure. But instead of having its basic building blocks of nucleotides, which operates on a database of 4, it contains a binary code of 2 that is known as bytes. And these bytes combine together to form the computer code that is quite similar to DNA code, in the sense that it tells the terminal what to form on the screen and how these forms should operate in accordance with the code, its essence of what it is. And that collection of computer code can be organized into a specific section of the program that represents that object, if you will. A function that contains all the code needed to fulfill said operation of that particular object, whether it be a character in a game, a weapon that they use, or simply a wall that prevents them from going any further. Each object has their own functions that play a vital role within their respective game. This brings me to my next point, the importance of a function and a purpose. But what exactly is a function, and what is a purpose? And how do we determine what an object's purpose is? But before we can answer that, we must understand how functions work and how to identify them. Earlier in this video, I made a claim that every tool, every occupation, every living organism, and every person has a function. But where does this function derive from? Is it from the physical form of an object, the shadow, or is it the non-physical essence of what an object is? Well, let's observe something simple by going back to the function of a shovel. A shovel as we know it is a tool that we use to transfer a solid substance from one point to another. So in a sense, a shovel is not entirely defined by its shadow, but rather its essence. In fact, one could argue that a spoon is technically a shovel. It may be a poor quality shovel, but nevertheless, it has the essence of a shovel and fulfills the function of a shovel despite its shadow being of poor quality when being used as a shovel. As a result, we can conclude that a function is defined by the essence, but the quality of its function is defined by its shadow. Now then, let's observe the purpose of a shovel and why they are needed. A shovel as we know it can be used to dig a hole and or fill a hole. Notice that the purpose of an object can have multitude of purposes and is determined by the user, but more specifically is influenced by the issue at hand. Let me explain. If a construction site needs a person to dig a hole, then a construction worker would use a shovel to perform this function of moving solid substance in order to fulfill the purpose of digging a hole, despite the fact that the shovel could be used to fill a hole or be used to create a mound. As a result, the purpose is defined by the user and influenced by the environment and or issues that spawn from the environment itself. But what happens when the function of the shovel is no longer needed? When there is no more need for a shovel? When the world no longer needs substance to move from one place to another? Well, it's quite simple actually. It becomes useless, or at best, used less. This is what happens to Felix whenever Ralph is absent. He is essentially stripped away of his function and is made useless. For what is his function if there are no objects to be fixed? Well, he becomes useless and is no longer useful, which will then lead to his lack of fulfillment. This is why the function is so vital in both recognizing and understanding. When one understands their functions, they can find the reasons for their lack of fulfillment in life. As a result, we need problems within this world so that we can find our function and our place in this world. Without them, we are quite literally useless in terms of utility. However, utility is not everything and is only the start, for the purpose is the reason and the drive of why we perform the functions that we choose to do, and is just as important, if not more important, than the function. Let me explain. Let's observe different occupations so that we can practice identifying different functions and learn to understand the importance of a purpose. We can do this by applying the same logic to a chef, a car mechanic, or a physician. We know that the function of a chef is to cook food, and the purpose of a chef can be, well, to feed the body and the soul. But the purpose of a chef could also be to become famous for his renowned food. Again, we see the purpose has a multitude of avenues that one as an individual can choose from. Well, what about a car mechanic? Well, their function is to repair cars, and their purpose can be as simple as making the car operational. Or it could be that their passion is to work on cars. Once more, purpose possesses a multitude of reasons as to why someone chooses to perform said function. As for a physician, their function is to heal the body, and their purpose can be driven by their yearning to help people, or their purpose can be driven by their desires to make money. At this point, I'm sure you can already recognize the pattern, for the function is defined by what a specific entity does, whereas the purpose is defined by why a specific entity does what it does. Why does a chef cook? Is it for others, or is it for his own vanity? Why does a car mechanic fix cars? Is it because it's simply his job, or does he have a passion for it? Why does a physician heal people? Is it because he genuinely wants to help people, or does he want to make a lot of money? This is how we identify one's purpose, the why. So how can we identify the function and the purpose of Felix? Well, we know that his function is to repair broken items with his magical hammer. And well, his sole purpose appears to be quite simple, given that he genuinely wants to fix broken objects by returning them back to their former selves. In short, it makes him happy. How ironic. But why is this so important to understand? Why is the function so important? Throughout the film, we see him restore the shadow of objects, restore the form of an individual, and restore the essence of a main character as he realigns himself back to his original code, if you will. We see this whenever he uses his hammer to fix the shadows of the world, such as the windows, the prison bars, and the race car. All three objects that have their shadows restored back to their original selves so that they can perform their functions properly. However, does this concept only apply to the physical world, or does it apply to the non-physical world as well? Well, we see this same idea of restoration, or fix-it, being applied to the form whenever Vanellope crosses the finish line and has her form as the rightful ruler of the video game finally restored. As for the essence, we see this firsthand when Ralph accepts his essence as a destroyer due to him finally being guided by a new purpose. But I'll explain that in later details. For now, let's return to Felix as a person and his function. We know that he is capable of restoring objects, shadows, forms, and even essence. But what about their purpose? Is he capable of restoring that as well? Well, let's take a look at Sergeant Colohan, who is given a broken backstory that discourages her from loving again. Essentially, she is given a function of a soldier where she kills cybugs, but is given minimal purpose of simply surviving. Yet at the end of the film, she decides to love again, and in doing so, she rekindles a new purpose where she is now fighting for the people that she loves. Overall, Felix's purpose is to return the broken objects of the world back to their original shadows, but can also indirectly extend towards an object's form, essence, and even purpose. So what does this mean for Ralph? We know that his function is that of a destroyer, and by the end of the film, he finally accepts his role. But what is this new purpose, and what exactly guides this new purpose? Questions for a later subject. So why is having a function and a purpose so important? Well, let's ask ourselves, what happens when a role is absent? At the start of the film, we see this firsthand when Ralph is nowhere to be found due to his actions of going turbo. As a result, the game becomes dysfunctional, quite literally meaning bad performance, and performance containing the word form. But how is form connected to performance? Well, I'll explain that later on in this video. For now, let's go back to this idea that the game is dysfunctional, or better yet, it is sick due to it having a disorder. Without Ralph, the game becomes incomplete, and in Felix is stripped away of his function. In doing so, the game is left in a state of chaos and disorder, and is no longer a part of the order that allows the game to perform its function. And if this disorder does not get fixed, then the owner will ultimately terminate the game, essentially ending the game's life. But how exactly is this philosophical, and what wisdom can we gain from this idea of dysfunction, disorder, form, and performance? In order to explain this significance, I'm going to need to compare this idea to the real world first, before I can make a philosophical claim. In human anatomy, the body contains specific organs. Each organ is given a specific function and must perform its function accordingly. Its performance is dictated by its form. A heart maintains the blood flow and is allowed to do so due to its form and its design. A femur's function is to provide support, specifically when a human is standing, and is able to do so due to its form and its structure. A liver similarly is responsible for filtering toxins in the body, and again, it is able to do so due to its form and its structure. At this point, we get it. But what happens when an organ decides to say, go turbo? When a heart decides it is not happy anymore and it wants to become a femur, or a liver is tired of filtering toxins and decides to be a heart instead. Now, of course, organs can't choose to be something that they're not, as they don't possess free will or a conscience, but neither do video game characters. So for this exercise, let's pretend that they do. Let's ask ourselves, what would happen if a heart decided to become a femur? Well, it's not hard to imagine that the body would suffer from the lack of blood flow and would in turn die in a matter of minutes. And even if the femur was to replace the heart, it does not have the physical form to perform said function. And for this hypothetical, let's say that the heart wasn't necessary for life, that we were able to sustain the body without the heart. Well, how well do you think the heart would be able to perform at being a femur? I think it goes without saying that the heart would make a poor femur, as its form would not allow it to perform its function or provide support while the body is upright. As a result, the body would have disorder, it would be riddled with disease and have dysfunction, which would ultimately lead to the termination of the body, as it would cease to exist and end in its death. Now let's go back to Wreck-It Ralph, both Ralph and especially Felix, who face this very issue, where one of the vital components in the system is missing and thus leaves the game in total disarray, thus causing it to be dysfunctional. And when Ralph tries to be something that he is not programmed to be, he fails at doing just that. For Ralph is programmed to break physical objects, not fix them. And the same is exponentially true for Felix, who, funnily enough, tries to be Ralph when he reaches his lowest point by attempting to break out of prison. But instead, he fixes his prison by reinforcing the bars, which could be an interpretation of how we can imprison ourselves into a state of misery when we try to be something that we are not. This is what going turbo means, to be something that you are not, and is a deep philosophical concept. Earlier in this video, I declared that the essence you choose to embody defines what function you ultimately decide to perform, and the quality of your function is limited by your shadow, which is your physical form. Now, I believe that everybody can trace down their pain, suffering, and misery to the very essence that they choose to embody and the limitations that are set forth by your shadow. Let me explain. Let's say that there are two identical gravediggers, equal in all aspects. They are tasked with the same mission of digging a hole. The first gravedigger is given a proper shovel, while the other is given a fork to dig said hole. In this scenario, both the shovel and the fork share the same essence, that being a shovel, which means they possess the same function as well, that being to transport substance from one point to another. However, both the shovel and the fork have different forms and shadows, the shovel having the form of a shovel and the shadow being, well, the actual physical shovel, whereas a fork has the form of a fork and the shadow being the actual physical fork. Both gravediggers use their respective tools to dig up the hole. However, the one who will be struggling the most will be the one using the fork, as its physical form becomes a hindrance to this specific function. This will lead him down a path of pain, suffering, and misery, as he tries to use a fork to perform the function of a shovel. In this scenario, it reflects the same turmoil that Ralph and Felix endure within this movie. Both try to be something that they are not, and in turn experience pain, suffering, and misery. But to be clear, this doesn't have to be a bad thing. Pain, suffering, and misery are great teachers and can develop us into great characters. They teach us about the limitations that these shadows possess and can give us insight into the path we choose not to take, and hopefully guide us down a path that we were programmed for. If I choose to use a fork to dig a hole and I suffer the entire way through, I can either choose to do the same thing again and suffer again, or I can learn from this experience and draw knowledge and wisdom from said experience to make a better judgment call in the future by using a better tool that is longer, sturdier, sharp, and with a widespread spade. Something like, say, a shovel that will eliminate the unnecessary suffering. Both Felix and Ralph realize this within their own character arcs. Felix realized that he isn't programmed to be an agent of destruction, and that's okay, for his function is to fix the broken objects of this world, and that's a good thing. And Ralph isn't programmed to fix objects, and that too is okay, for his function is to be the agent of destruction that is necessary in order to destroy the corrupt, and that too is a good thing. You see, both construction and deconstruction have a place in this world and are vital to the existence of this universe. Neither construction or deconstruction is inherently bad or good. It's what you choose to do with your gifts that determines your morality. Do you choose to construct an empire and a lie that benefits you in favor of your subjects? Or do you choose to construct a home for those that are less fortunate? Do you choose to destroy the things around you in order to achieve your own personal goals? Or do you choose to destroy the prisons that chained your loved ones? Both share the same function, but both have very different purposes. That is why it is paramount to understand one's purpose for determining the morality of an individual, whether it be good or bad. Why do you choose to do said action? Why do you choose to be constructive? Why do you choose to be deconstructive? Is it for the betterment of yourself that is fueled by your own selfish pride so that you can obtain your ephemeral desires? Or is it for the betterment of others that is fueled by your love for them? All good questions for another time. For now, put a pin in that thought as we continue, and at the end of this video, I will give you my thoughts on the relationship between purpose and happiness. Earlier in this video, I equated ugly to poor and beautiful to great in terms of quality. But before we can understand these terms in the context of Plato's theories of form, we first must understand the terms shadow, form, essence, and function in their entirety. Function and shadows reside in the physical world, while the forms and the essence reside in the ideals, which are perfect. And in my earlier video, I explained why ideals are perfect. I also explained how perfection can only exist in the ideals, due to it having no physical limitations caused by the physical world. A quick example can be made in any basic technology or engineering course. In electronics, you have the concept of ideal resistors. They are perfect in terms of value. Let's take a 40 ohm resistor. This resistor works in the mathematical calculations. However, there is no perfect 40 ohm resistor that actually exist in this world. That is why all resistors have a tolerance for its accuracy in regards to their ideal resistor. This same concept can be applied to the shadow and the form. The shadow being the physical resistor and the form being the perfect ideal resistor. All physical resistors share the same form, that is the ideal resistor, which is perfect because it has exactly 40 ohms. However, each physical resistor has a varying degree to its accuracy. With that said, some resistors are closer to this ideal form than others, but regardless, they are imperfect due to this world being imperfect. Now then, this brings me to the concept of how Plato viewed beautiful and ugly objects. When it comes to these two concepts, they are rooted within their form, and their beauty is determined by their shadow, which is simply their physical form. It's a spectrum of how close they are to this perfect ideal form. If a resistor is closer to this ideal form in terms of resistance, then it is objectively more beautiful than, say, a resistor that is nowhere close to this ideal form. This would make the poor resistor ugly in terms of this form. Essentially, beauty is given to the shadows that possess the form more accurately. It's not a matter of attraction, which is subjective. It's a matter of how well it embodies said form, thus making it objective. I can say I am attracted to abstract art because of my own personal experiences of living in an imperfect life and dealing with the fact that I am not perfect myself. This allows me to connect to abstract art, which are imperfect representations of the world, and is the reason why I might gravitate towards them, and is thus the reason why I am attracted to them. But for me to say that Starry Night is a beautiful picture of the city is dishonest. In terms of representing the city, it is an ugly representation of the city, by the standards of it not staying true to the form of the city. Regardless if I find myself gravitating towards it because I am attracted to the relatable feeling of imperfection, it doesn't make it any more beautiful than what it is. However, this is where essence comes into play. Remember, essence is also an ideal, which means that it too contains perfection, yet it doesn't represent the shadow of the world like the form does, but rather it is the non-physical ideal that represents the physical actions of what said object does, essentially the function. And for Starry Night, it would be considered a beautiful piece of art. Why? Because it fulfills the essence of what art is designed to do. Art being the medium in which an artist uses the physical world to express a concept, emotion, and/or idea to their audience, to bring meaning and purpose to a physical object so that it can exceed more than what it is. Just like Starry Night, it is technically just a clump of metals and chemicals that sit upon a canvas, but it is designed in a way by the artist to become more than just a painting. For the audience can relate to it as they see the imperfect world that we live in, and yet the beautiful essence of the world that is intangible. Ironically, art uses the physical world to convey non-physical concepts. This applies to any art form. For example, music is just a vibration of molecules, but when composed and ordered with intention, it becomes more than what it is. The same could be said for movies. It is just the synthesis of light and vibrating molecules, and yet it means more than just that. It transcends its shadow and becomes something more than what it is. It is important to recognize that the shadow, which is the physical form, is derived from the form itself, while the function, which is the physical action, is derived from the essence, and that the shadow and the function lie within this spectrum of ugly and beautiful in regards to their respective source. But why does beauty matter in terms of form and essence? Well, let's observe the form first and why it is important. Remember that the function is determined by its essence, but its ability to perform said function is limited by its form. With that said, the word perform gives way to the importance of forms. The prefix per means for each, used with units to express a rate. If per means unit and form means the perfect ideal object, then the synthesis of these two concepts lead to this idea of the shadow being a certain unit measurement in terms of its form. Sort of like how a resistor is closer to the ideal resistor, which is based on its units of measurement, that being ohm resistance. And in turn, this dictates the resistor's performance when being used in a circuit. This sadly applies to the physical forms that we contain in this world. For instance, a pug, which is objectively ugly, is unable to breathe properly due to its disfigured and deformed skull. This causes it to have serious chronic breathing problems due to its physical form of its skull, thus hindering its ability to function as a dog, for a living creature like a dog needs to breathe properly. However, the form of a shadow is not the most important aspect of what we are, for it is what we choose to do that is more important, that being our function. Even though the shadow is vital to one's function, it is our essence that gives way to the function and is equally, if not more important than the form. With the essence, you can be more than what you are and derive a function that you were designed to do. And the encouraging part about essence is that it doesn't restrict or fix your function in terms of beauty, for it is relative to the point of time from which you reflect upon yourself. Let me explain. If I wish to embody the essence of a boxer, I will most likely be a rookie with an ugly fighting stance, being uncoordinated, having poor footwork, insufficient spatial awareness, being inexperienced in terms of getting punched, and lacking the technique to throw a punch. All qualities that embody what it means to be a boxer. And for me, at that specific point of time, I would be a very ugly boxer. However, with proper guidance and training, I could dedicate my time and discipline to this craft, and over time, I could improve upon my function as a boxer by fixing my fighting stance, training my muscle-eye coordination, practicing moving my feet, learning and studying spatial awareness, and of course, sparring. Eventually, I would get closer to this ideal essence of what a boxer is, and even though I might not be the most beautiful boxer, I would be a more beautiful boxer than when I started. However, it's also important to realize that again, my physical form is my limitation. For it doesn't matter how hard I train, I will never overcome the process of growing old. I will naturally lose my beauty as a boxer due to my age. Now, I need to be clear that just because one is ugly in terms of shadows or functions does not mean that they are evil. It's just a way to identify a shadow's ability to perform its function, which is the synthesis of its form and its essence. But you might be asking yourself right now, why are we talking about beauty and ugly so extensively? And how does this even relate to Wreck-It Ralph? Well, the best observation of this parallel can be seen when Ralph creates the ugly yet beautiful race car. The race car's shadow might be ugly as it is quite unconventional, with multiple parts sticking out while lacking uniformity and symmetry, which is heavily associated with physical beauty in terms of its form, that being a race car. Yet its function, which is derived from its essence, that being a race car, is beautiful as it performs the function of a race car efficiently and effectively. This is a case where the essence matters more than the form, and the same concept can be applied to Vanellope and Ralph. Vanellope is the shadow that takes the form of an ugly princess that is perceived as a vagabond with a glitch. Yet in her heart of hearts, she knows that her essence is that of a race car driver. And even though she lacks the skill of a beautiful race car driver, she too has an ugly function at the start of her journey. It isn't until she trains and dedicates her time and energy into this discipline that she is able to morph herself into a beautiful race car driver. Just like the boxer, she too can improve upon her function until finally she becomes the beautiful race car driver that she was programmed to be. And ironically, her glitch, which is perceived as an ugly quality in terms of her form, is actually an asset whenever she applies it to racing. As a result, these concepts can be applied to Vanellope, but how exactly does this concept apply to Ralph? In Wreck-It Ralph, Vanellope is cursed with a glitch that prevents her from leaving the game, and is the side effect of her being disconnected from the program of the game. This causes her to be ostracized both literally and figuratively, as she is disconnected from the program and is seen as an incomplete and imperfect part of the game, with a faulty and ugly code that doesn't allow her to perform her function properly, when in actuality, she is just disconnected from the program and is cursed with this particular side effect. But what exactly can we learn from this metaphor of being a glitch? Well, in order to explain this, I'm going to need to go back to this DNA analogy. If Vanellope's DNA code, so to speak, is her computer code, then her glitch would stand to reason to be her mutation. Now ask yourself, what is a mutation? How does it come about? What is the purpose of a mutation? And is it good or is it bad? Well, for starters, a mutation by definition is a permanent random change in an organism's DNA sequence, acting as the driving force for genetic variation that allows for evolution to occur. When we look at its etymology, we can derive the word from its Latin word mutatium, a changing or alteration. So, in its most basic raw meaning, it means change, and that makes sense. Whenever you have a structure like DNA that is consistently ordered and organized, it needs a catalyst to facilitate change in order for there to be evolution. And the most natural way for this to happen is to incorporate a mutation. Now, how exactly do mutations occur? Well, this is where it gets complicated. From what we know so far about mutations, there are 3 different ways. The first one makes up 2/3 of the mutations, where the DNA's mechanisms make a faulty error during replication and in turn changes the DNA on accident. Sort of like how a factory unintentionally creates a faulty product. It's just the side effect of living in this imperfect world. Accidents happen. The second way for DNA to mutate makes up 29% of the mutations, where an external factor influences the DNA, such as radiation. With this external force, it can happen anytime and anywhere during replication or during a cell's natural life cycle. As for the third, it is the most unlikely to happen, as it makes up only 5% of the mutations that occur. This being the inherited mutation that occurs during conception, whether it be the sperm or the egg cells. Now, for Vanellope, the second matches her situation, where an outside force meddles in her code and changes it. that being King Candy, who literally ripped her code away from the program and thus caused a change in how she is rendered into their world, sort of like how a mutation might change the physical attributes of your body, such as a tumor or the color of your eyes. Now, why exactly do we need mutations? Aren't tumors bad? And why would we need to change someone's appearance? Are they not enough as they are? Well, that depends. Let me explain. In evolution, natural selection is used to pick the most desirable traits according to the demands of their environment. In order to explain this, I'm going to need to use an example, where a group of colorful frogs are dumped onto this island. On this island, they have natural predators that hunt them down and eat them. Now, throughout the course of the next year, the only surviving frogs that last long enough to repopulate are the ones that blend in well with the flora of their environment, that being green and blue. This happens for the next few years until all frogs are either born as green or blue frogs, thus eliminating the genes that once bore the different colored frogs. Now, since mutations still occur on this island, every so often a frog is given a different color, such as red, orange, yellow, black, etc. But they don't last long due to their predators picking them off with ease. And even if they do survive, none of the other frogs find them attractive, as they will see their new genes as a hindrance on their offspring's natural survival, as it is hardwired into the brain to seek out the most desirable traits that have ensured their survival on this island. Now, some of you might be asking yourselves, are these specific frogs doomed to fail? And if so, why are mutations good? Are they not deviations that should be avoided at all costs? Well, sort of, but not really. It all depends on the environment that they exist in and the demands that it requires of their hosts. You see, the green and blue frogs thrive in this specific environment, but what happens when a catastrophic event that alters the environment completely occurs? For instance, a volcano eruption that burns the flora and vegetation to a cinder, leaving nothing but ash and lava all over the place. Well, then the frogs that once thrive in this environment are at a severe disadvantage. With their inability to no longer camouflage to the environment, they are now the ones that are easy to pick off. Whereas the once doomed frogs that were once born as red, orange, black, and gray are now better off at surviving in this specific environment, thus saving the species from extinction, as they are able to survive through a process called evolutionary rescue. Now, how does this idea transfer to Wreck-It Ralph? Well, with Vanellope, her glitch is seen as a bad trait that should be shunned and reviled, to not be desired because it is seen as a disadvantage and a hindrance, when in actuality it is an advantage that has not only allowed her to win races, but also saves Ralph in the finale. Without her glitch, Ralph would be dead, and in turn, so would the game. Not to mention everyone from that game would be without a home. In a strange way, her so-called glitch not only saved her, but an entire world as well. Sort of like how a mutation might have saved an entire species of frogs from extinction. However, we humans are not excluded from this either. We too developed our mutations that has helped us to survive famines, a trait known as lactase persistence, which allows humans to produce the enzymes lactase, which allows us to process dairy products well into adulthood. With this evolutionary advantage, we could acquire energy from animals without killing them. This would ensure our survival even if our crops failed, whether it be by famine or drought. However, it is important to recognize the reality of mutations and the harmful side effects that they can inflict onto an organism's functionality. Specifically, mutations that induce tumors in a very vital organ, such as the brain or the heart. When it comes to vital organs, it can be detrimental to its ability to function properly and is fragile when it comes to change. For instance, a heart replicating another copy of itself might sound good, as it could pump twice the amount of blood, but in actuality the body will encounter more health complications even if the heart performs well. For the other organs will most likely struggle to operate accordingly to this new acquired component. Sort of like how one might put a jet engine in a car. Even if the jet engine performs well, the other parts could not handle that output. The tires would burn out, the transmission would melt, the frame would collapse, so on and so forth. That is why evolution takes its time. It is a slow and steady progress that allows for small changes over large amounts of time, which allows for great leaps when looking at the grand scheme of things, which to me makes Vanellope's glitch a miracle that should have not happened by all accounts. To change a person so drastically and to keep her functional is nothing short of amazing. In spite of all the possibilities that could have gone wrong, she survived and thrived. At the end of the day, mutations and glitches are only bad when they fail to keep their users alive, but when utilized in harmony with their environment, they can make it into the new desirable trait. Earlier in this video, we discussed the shadow, the form, and the essence. When it comes to King Candy, he is a trickster and a pretender, for he fabricates King Candy as his physical shadow while he pretends to take the form of a king. And yet he still retains his essence, that being Turbo, who is a self-obsessed tyrant. That is what makes his reveal so shocking. It's not the fact that we didn't see this coming, it's the fact that we should have seen it coming. We as the audience and even the characters in the movie were deceived by his shadow and his form, that we failed to see the truth, his essence. Throughout the film, he is still embodying the essence of Turbo. He locks up Ralph not because of his destructive nature, but because he fears that he will take over his game and steal his spotlight. He usurps Sugar Rush from Vanellope just like he did when he hijacked himself into another racing game. Granted, he had no finesse back then, yet he would quickly adapt by developing the skills needed to take over Sugar Rush. Even the very fact that he chose to take over Sugar Rush, a racing car game of all things, speaks volumes to who he is as a person. He may have been able to change his shadow and his form, but he could never change his essence due to his pride. His pride is what held him back, as it was too great for him to relinquish, and would be the reason for his first downfall, as well as his second. It's no coincidence that his pride was what revealed his true colors, and resulted in the same lashing out that he did when he first went Turbo, to the time when he crashed into Vanellope just like he did several years ago. He quite literally and figuratively crashed out. But how can we relate this to philosophy? Well, if King Candy was tricking us through his shadows and his forms, but was leaking his true essence through his actions, then it would stand to reason that we should not always believe in what we see, feel, touch, smell, or taste. That we should look past the shadow of an object and look upon its essence through its function and purpose. Understand the actions that it takes and why it chooses to take said actions. We shouldn't judge on appearances alone, but remember the essence, functions, and purpose are equally, if not more important than the shadow and the form. We should not be so harsh on our judgment towards others because of their shadow or their form. But we should get to know their essence when possible, so that we can truly understand who they are. Yet it doesn't just end there, for when we strip away the shadow in the form of an object, we can see past what it appears to be and peer deeper into its essence, to see how it relates to other concepts that we have encountered, and form new syntheses of ideas that help us to understand the world on a much deeper level. It's a strange thought, so you'll have to bear with me as I explain my reasoning. Let's look at football, a sport in American culture where one team tries to outscore the others in terms of getting a ball into a particular position for arbitrary points. By all intents and purposes, a sport like football is not real in the physical sense, as it is an abstract activity that involves arbitrary rules, boundaries, and arithmetic to declare a vector. To be clear, I am not saying that football is fake, for I do believe that it is real, even if it is an idea that we as a culture agree upon. However, it is important to see the design of the game by observing its function and its purpose. For when you strip away most of its glamour and boil it down to its most basic elements, you see its true essence. When I look upon a football game, I see the mimicry of war. I see formations, blitzes, armor, generals, soldiers, captains, deception, order, discipline, composure, chaos, camaraderie, violence, injuries, failures, and of course, victories. all concepts and ideas that exist in the realm of war without actually bringing the negative repercussions that naturally spawn from it. But why? Why would we do this? Well, it's the same reason why we create vaccines, to strengthen ourselves by giving us low doses that don't kill us, but still give us growth within those areas. It allows us the opportunity to practice our discipline and develop our strength in a healthy manner. And when I speak of war, I do not necessarily mean war as in the military, but rather all events and occurrences that embody the essence of war, whether it be a war with yourself, a war against nature, a war with a subject matter that you just don't understand, a war with an addiction, or even a war with your own faith. When we come to realize this, we start to understand the purpose of a sport, not just as a means of entertainment or physical activity, but why we choose to participate, and more importantly, how we can implement these ideas into our lives, as it can help us to realize a deeper meaning that helps us in a more profound way. This is why it is paramount to recognize the patterns of different subject matters and see the true essence of anything in this world, so that we can make meaningful connections between seemingly distant and unrelated subject matters, such as football being a vaccine of war. Physically, that doesn't make sense, but in the context of their essence, it makes perfect sense. Like I said, this concept applies to everything in this world, for nothing is restrained in the vacuum, for the universe is more closely related than we realize. The world as we know it is not always what we believe it to be, especially when we base our opinions on our own personal experiences that can be easily manipulated by forces that we might not understand yet. Our five senses should not be disregarded, but at the same time, there is more to this world than what we perceive. Sometimes the non-physical aspects of our lives, such as essence, function, and purpose, matter just as much, if not more. This brings me to my next major point, the locking of our memories. A symbolism that is deeply ingrained into a religion that is a syncretic fusion of Christianity, Judaism, and Plato's forms. This, of course, being Gnosticism. Now, I personally don't believe in everything that Gnosticism teaches. However, there are some interesting ideas that I do present, for which I do believe to be true, mainly the demiurge. Now, some of you might be asking yourself, who exactly is the demiurge? Well, before I explain who he is, I need to explain who Monad is. Without spending too much time on the subject, I will simply sum him up to the supreme spiritual being who is the source of perfection. In Gnosticism, this plane of existence is called Florna. Now, you'll have to excuse my pronunciation or lack of knowledge how to say the word, but for the remainder of the video, I will be using the plane of existence as the forms, since we've been using it for the majority of the video already. Now remember, the forms are just the non-physical ideas that are perfect. This is where the demiurge comes into play, where he is another high-dimensional being that decided to take over the forms and recreate it in his own image, as he is seen as the architect. He usurps Monad's kingdom and recreates the forms, but instead of being perfect, it comes out as an imperfect world because it is coming from an imperfect being and not the perfect source that is Monad. Now, some of you might have already guessed what this plane of existence is. Essentially, the demiurge created the physical universe, and is the reason why this world is imperfect and corruptible. Now, the reason for him creating the physical world is so that he can become the ruler of his new kingdom. He essentially rewrites the codes to his liking and creates laws within the new system in order to maintain his sovereign authority over his physical realm. And to ensure that his subjects don't remember Monad, the demiurge locks away our memories to the best of his ability. In order for him to achieve this, he has to convince you that this physical world is real and the non-physical world is made up. He does this by plagiarizing scientific laws, religion, morals, and math, while preying upon our animalistic urges to keep us enslaved to his will. And again, he is imperfect, which is why all of his creations, that being the shadows, are also imperfect when compared to the perfect forms. This is why pure math doesn't match up with applied mathematics, why science is so chaotic despite being rigid in its ideas, or how morals can be so black and white, but when applied to the physical world, it is not so clear on what is right or wrong. Does this sound familiar? When you compare the Demiurge with King Candy, it matches perfectly. Both usurped a kingdom that wasn't their own. They both created a kingdom that is a mere imitation of the one that they stole by rewriting the code. They both wish to rule as the supreme being and do not like it when any outsiders choose to challenge their authority and rule. They both use laws to keep their subjects in line. They both prey upon our deepest desires to keep us obedient. They both use the physical world to conceal the truth of who they really are. And they ultimately try to keep us from remembering the truth that resides in the forms, or the gaming program in this case. But what exactly can we draw from this religious teaching? Well, for me personally, I believe we as human beings should acknowledge the physical world as it is. For regardless if the physical world is a prison, as the Gnostics believe it to be, we are still bounded by the laws of this physical world, a world that we know to be imperfect. And yet, we should operate within the world to the best of our abilities, but also pursue truth and virtue that cannot be touched, seen, or heard, but can be observed and experienced when we wrestle with these abstract ideas that help us to understand the world we live in. And if we choose to pursue truth and virtue, I believe it will lead us away from our animalistic urges such as lust, greed, wrath, and pride, which is solely designed to be self-destructive, but for the betterment of the people that we love that is called upon us by the forms and the essence that we cannot touch or see. A pivotal character within Wreck-It Ralph is Fix-It Felix Jr. and is the key to understanding how one can obtain true happiness. After all, his name literally means happy in Latin. But in order to understand true happiness, we need to observe his actions so that we can identify his function and ultimately his essence, that being fixing broken objects. But what does this actually mean? What does it mean to fix a broken object? Well, let's observe an example of the broken shovel. We discussed earlier that a shovel is a shovel not solely based on its physical shadow, but rather its essence, which gives way to its function. And a shovel's function is to transport material from one place to another. Now ask yourself, what would constitute a broken shovel? Does it depend on the shovel's shadow, form, or essence? Well, it's all of them, but it ultimately is based on its function. Let me explain. If you possess a shovel that has a gaping hole in the middle and it fails to transport material from one place to another, then it is failing at its function. The same could be said for a fork that takes on the form of a fork, but embodies the essence of a shovel, and thus is considered broken in its form as it fails to perform its function. The same goes for the essence, for if you have a shovel that is beautiful in its shadow as it takes on the form of the perfect shovel, but then you use it to transport soup into your mouth, technically it is performing the function of a shovel, but it is broken in its essence, for it was not built to embody the essence of a spoon. It's important to note that the shadow, form, and essence need to be in sync with one another in order to achieve a concept known as Dharma. For now, let's return to the broken shovel. In all three scenarios, each of these shovels are broken for very different reasons, but can be fixed or better yet restored back to their original functions. For the first one, all you need to do is fix the physical shadow of the broken shovel by repairing the spade. As for the second one, all you need to do is realign the fork back to its original essence, and it will no longer struggle to be a broken shovel. For the third, all you need to do is return its essence back to a shovel, so that it is no longer a broken spoon that can perform its function beautifully. In order to fix a broken object, you need to restore either the shadow, form, and/or essence of an object back to its original design so that it can perform its function with optimal beauty. This is where Felix comes into play. The idea of fixing broken objects is how we achieve true happiness and fulfillment, as we are able to perform our functions so beautifully from our intended design. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying Felix is the epitome of happiness. I'm saying he represents happiness, mainly his powers. But in order to explain this further, I'm going to need to explain why happiness is so heavily tethered to function. And instead of looking towards the ancient world of Rome, where the word Felix comes from, I'm going to explore an even older civilization that I believe to have the best interpretation of what it means to be truly happy, to the world of India, where Hinduism originated from. Earlier ago, I mentioned the word Dharma, a concept within the religion of Hinduism, but what does it actually mean? It essentially means to uphold your design that was given to you by the cosmic order, so that you can fulfill your duty with virtue and righteousness. By accepting your function and doing your best to fulfill that duty that was given to you by the universe. Once you do this, you can begin to accept yourself for who you are and are no longer hating yourself for the person that you are. Only then can you begin to fix your broken shadow, realize your form from which you are derived from, and ultimately realign your essence with your function. This is how you achieve Dharma, by living the right way, by being righteous and virtuous in what we are designed to do. And in turn, we achieve true happiness, Ananda, where one awakens and realizes their true essence by realigning with their true function. Oddly enough, the Greeks knew of this concept but never saw happiness as this. For Dharma and Plato's functions illustrate the same ideas and concepts, and Wreck-It Ralph demonstrates the restoration of all three concepts perfectly. The shadow, Felix restoring the broken race car back to its original design, the form, when Vanellope returns to her true form as the queen and not a vagabond, and lastly, the essence, when Ralph comes to the realization that his function and purpose as a destroyer is not inherently bad, for it is necessary in order to destroy the corrupt and the wicked that tried to enslave us. In the end, all three characters are broken in one way or another, but when they restore their shadow, form, and essence, they can begin to achieve their function, their dharma, which will ultimately lead them down a path of virtue, and in doing so, they can begin to accept themselves for who they are. This is what brings them true happiness and ananda that cannot be taken from them. For happiness doesn't reside in the physical world, but rather it exists in the non-physical world, where beauty, truth, and virtue reside. In the movie, Ralph pursues the Medal of Heroes, and at first it may seem petty and folly that Ralph pursues this medal, but in actuality, this is the very object that he needed in order to realize his function and later on his purpose. For him, pursuing the Medal of Heroes was actually the right call, even if it was for the wrong reasons. But before I explain this, I need to define the function of a medal so that I can explore the purpose of such an object. Now, some of you might be confused as to why a medal needs a function. It's just a medal, right? It's not that deep, right? True, but it's still vital information to the overarching symbolism that it carries. Just because it is not deep does not mean that it is not vital. Sort of like how a quadratic formula might have a small constant at the end of the equation that might not affect the equation significantly, but it still is important in understanding the answer. But I digress. The function of a medal is quite simple. It is a symbol that signals to the people around you that you possess or once possessed the qualities that were needed in order to earn this specific medal. Now, medals have different degrees, like a bronze medal is lesser than a gold medal. For the gold medal requires a higher degree of that specific quality to obtain. This is why Ralph deeply desires the need for a medal, to show to others that he isn't just a monster or a bad guy, but that he does possess the good qualities that would constitute him as a hero. I think his heart was in the right place, but he was doing it for the wrong reasons. Let me explain. In the movie, Ralph pursues the Medal of Heroes, but the way he goes about obtaining the medal is not very hero-like. It's no coincidence that when he enters hero's duty, that he is scared and frightened by the world around him. He screams like a frightened child. He wants the medal for selfish reasons. He can't keep his composure. He literally hides behind a child when faced by death. And to top it off, he decides to acquire the medal through dishonorable means, by cheating his way to the top of the tower and stealing the medal before he can go through the crucible, in order to verify that he is worthy of wearing such a medal. That quite literally strips away the whole function of the medal. Sure, you might have the physical medal itself, but you didn't have or develop the skills needed in order to earn the medal. You're still the same person that you were before stealing the medal, if not worse than before, because him stealing the medal at the very beginning of the film did not display any qualities that a hero would possess. And to make matters worse, he was dishonorable, or rather, dishonest about obtaining the medal, which makes it hollow and meaningless, and at best, it makes him a fraud. That's why when he returns to the Nicelander's apartment to obtain his prize, he is left empty and alone and hollow. He may have the physical medal within his possession, but the manner in which he obtained the medal is false. The shadow of the medal may look beautiful, yet it does not match the function, thus making the medal a lie. And he knows it too. However, this realization is what literally allowed him to see the truth of this world, that not everything is what it seems to be. That the physical world is important, but not more important than the non-physical world. That the shadows are flawed imitations of the form which contain the truth, and the truth can be observed through the essence of an object that allows us to see the function. Once he accepts this, he is able to reconcile this mistake that he initially had and repurpose his function for virtue and truth. By returning to the corrupt world of Sugar Rush, not as a liar that self-loathes himself as he tries to be a restorer like Felix, but rather as an honest man who accepts himself as a destroyer that is necessary in order to destroy the corrupt institutions that imprison, enslave, and subjugate the weak. Only then is he able to find his dharma, so to speak, and use his gifts not for his own selfish desires, but the betterment of his community and his universe. It is in that moment that he truly becomes the hero that is no longer pursuing the material world, but recognizes the truth behind the shadows and sees the essence in the form of an object. And in doing so, he earns the Medal of Heroes, the title of what it means to be a hero, a person that puts his life on the line for the people that he loves. This brings me to my next major point, the Beacon of Light and the Cybugs. Within this movie, the Cybugs are essentially a virus or a plague within this game, Hero's Duty, and act as the opposition to the player within this game. And we learn early on that these creatures can only be purged by a beacon of light that is capable of vaporizing them. Now, some of you might have figured out their meaning within this film and what they represent. We know that the Cybugs consume the material world and spread like a plague, eating everything in sight and morphing into the very thing that they consume. Visually, they are viruses that consume the material world due to their insatiable hunger. But metaphorically, they represent the insatiable hunger that is within every person as they seek to fulfill their soul with the material world. And within Wreck-It Ralph, they represent his internal desires to obtain the physical world. In the very beginning, he wants to possess the Medal of Heroes so that he can obtain the Nicelander's apartment, and so that he can enjoy the luxurious life like having parties, living in a fancy apartment, and eating cake. This demonstrates Ralph's desire to obtain the physical world, but notice that this will not satisfy his hunger. And in fact, it will only cause him to spiral out of control as he will only be consumed by his own hunger, just like the Cybugs. Let me explain. At the beginning, Ralph expresses his yearning to be recognized as a good guy, or rather a hero, and he believes that a good guy is recognized for his deeds by the materialistic properties that one possesses. This is why he is envious of Felix, who has a nice physical medal, a nice physical building, a nice physical luxurious party, and a nice physical cake. Ralph believes that this is what constitutes a hero, that if a person is given these physical objects, that they are then deemed a hero. So with that said, he pursues the physical material world in order to obtain this status. First, he seeks to join the party, to feel a sense of belonging. And even though the Nicelanders are reluctant in letting him in, they do allow him to partake in the party. But after entering the party, he realizes that the party did not make him a hero. So he seeks more validation in the material world, thinking it will sate his hunger to be a hero. With that said, he seeks to find more validation within the cake, but is quickly repulsed by how they perceive him. This deeply offends him to the point that he now wants to prove them wrong by showing them that he too can be a hero. And for him, all he needs to do is obtain a medal that will validate his desires. Funny enough, the medal is not a means to an end, for he is only pursuing the medal so that he can obtain his perceived ultimate prize, that being the Nicelander's apartment, along with all the material luxuries that Felix possesses. And when he finally obtains what he thinks he needs in order to sate his hunger, he is still left empty and hollow despite consuming every materialistic desires that he thought he needed in order to sate his hunger. And to make matters worse, he did it at the cost of his own home being destroyed. A similar outcome to the Cybugs, who consume all the material world but would logically be their own demise, as this would only cause the game's owner to pull the plug on them as the game would be dysfunctional, thus causing them to die. So if the Cybugs represent Ralph's insatiable desires, what does the Beacon of Light represent? Well, let's go back to Plato's ideals. To Plato, light represents truth, reason, knowledge, virtue, and wisdom. All non-physical aspects of the universe. This is how we sate our hunger, that is not physical and is infinite. And this is how Ralph is able to defeat not only his physical desires, but also the physical manifestations of his insatiable hunger. Now why is this so, and how can you sate a hunger that is infinite? Well, in order to explain this, I'm going to need to explain two concepts, resource and source. Everything in the physical world is a resource, and every non-physical aspect of the world is a source. And in order for me to explain this, I'm going to use a simple scenario that will make sense of this confusing statement. Let's imagine that I go to the store and I buy 5 apples. The apples are physical objects that are given limitations based on the physical qualities, thus making them finite by design, meaning that if I were to eat an apple, I would not be able to share the same apple with another person, nor would I be able to eat that same apple at a different time. And the only way for me to share or eat an apple is to get that source again, or rather obtain the specific resource. Re meaning again and source meaning, well, source. This is what makes a resource, its ability to be obtained once more. But notice that a resource is only good once it has been used up and is finite by nature, meaning that I would need to go back to the source again over and over again in order to sate that specific hunger or need. As a result, resources are finite and cannot fulfill infinite desires. Now, sources are pretty much the opposite of resources. Instead of being finite, they are infinite. But let me explain with another scenario. Like I said, a source is a non-physical aspect of the world around us. Let's take knowledge for example, but more specifically the knowledge of how to make a net. In this scenario, I have no idea how to create a net, nor do I know how to use it. But my teacher, who does know this knowledge, does, and he decides to teach me how to make a net and utilize it to fish. When my teacher gives me this knowledge, he does not lose the knowledge of how to make a net or use it. Instead, he retains this knowledge and multiplies it, in a sense, by passing it down to another person. Now, 2 people are capable of recalling this knowledge without diluting or extracting this knowledge from another person. This could not be said for, say, an apple that could not be shared equally like knowledge. This is but one quality that makes a source infinite, its ability to be shared without taking away from another. However, it does not stop there, for it is infinite in possibilities and can also sate the hunger of curiosity and thirst for knowledge. Think of science and how we are unable to learn everything that there is to know about biology. Whenever we answer a question that we've been struggling to answer for years, we find more questions in its stead that causes us to go deeper into that school of thought. The same could be said for the mechanics of the net and how we've made progress within this evolution of nets, from the simple primitive net to the more complex one that requires more sophisticated engineering. And even if we master the net, it can still lead us to other tools that were the prerequisites in order to obtain that knowledge, such as the sling evolving into the atlat evolving into the spear evolving into the bow and arrow evolving into the crossbow, and the crossbow evolving into the firearms. All weapons that are designed to shoot projectiles, but each one more sophisticated than the previous one, and yet a certain degree of knowledge was needed in order to understand the mechanics of the next. This is how a source can be infinite in both quantity and longevity. This is where the saying, "It's better to teach a man to fish than to give him a fish for a day," it becomes such a resonating theme within this context. In this scenario, if I was to choose the fish over the knowledge, I would only sate my hunger for that specific day and would be hungry the very next day. Whereas if I learned to fish, I would be able to feed myself throughout my life and would develop into a better human being that would allow me to not only depend so desperately on a resource such as a fish, but I would gain knowledge and be better off for it. Now, I'm not trying to downplay the importance of the physical world. It should go without saying that the physical world should not be ignored. By all means, eat food if your stomach is hungry. After all, food is necessary for our physical bodies so that we can properly function. But I repeat, do not sate your hunger for internal fulfillment by consuming the material world. It will at best postpone this hunger that you have, and it will only grow in your absence for you not recognizing the true problem. It's like trying to heal a wound with a body cast. It's the wrong treatment for this specific injury that will not be healed and will only fester out of control until finally it will consume you. The only way for one to find fulfillment in their lives is to pursue the non-physical world by pursuing truth, knowledge, love, and wisdom. And those that choose to pursue the materialistic world will become the metaphorical embodiment of the cybugs that will consume the world around them until they become mindless beasts that act on impulse alone, until eventually they collapse onto their own weight, similar to that of a black hole, where it continues to consume matter at an alarming rate until nothing can escape its insatiable hunger. However, we as humans don't need to mimic this concept, but instead we can choose to be the bearers of light that radiate the energy just like the sun does, by bringing life to the world around us through acts of wisdom, virtue, and love. At the end of the day, Ralph is only able to defeat the metaphorical cybugs and literal manifestations of his hunger by accepting who he is, by looking past the physical world so that he can heal the non-physical injuries that cause him to malfunction. My last major point is Ralph's name. Now at first it might seem insignificant, but I assure you that it isn't. When one looks up the etymology of Rao, one will realize that the Germanic name means wolf counsel, or wise wolf. Now, in order to understand the significance of his name, we need to dissect these three words. Let's begin with wolf. Now when one looks up the definition of wolf, it is pretty simple. A large carnivorous mammal of genus Canis. It's pretty basic. It's a wolf. Not much to it, really. So instead of looking at its definition for clarity, let's observe what the wolf represents to the German people. For the wolf is a symbol of a powerful duality between unwavering loyalty and untamable wilderness. Strange, isn't it? How is it possible that an entity can be so fixated to order while being an agent of chaos? But when we map this onto Ralph, we can see how a person might be chaotic in nature, causing unforeseeable chaos, and yet he is loyal to a fold and he is willing to die for his loved ones. However, this duality is where his conflict resides, for he is like a sled being pulled in opposite directions by two wolves that naturally conflict with one another. Yet the key is not to starve or ostracize the wolf that you are ashamed of because you fear of how others might perceive it, but instead it is important to recognize that it is a part of you, just as much as the other. It must be cared for just like the other. Only then can you find balance within yourself and learn to harness the two wolves so that they don't have to work against each other, but instead work with one another towards a greater goal. Remember, loyalty is not inherently good. I could be a loyal subject to a tyrant and follow his orders blindly by doing unspeakable crimes. And the same could be said for being wild, as it is not inherently bad and is necessary for those to break from the chains of suppression so that life can find another way. When one finds a purpose that is virtuous, they can guide their actions through morality, and the engines, that being the wolves of loyalty and wilderness, give impetus to our actions. This balance is the key to finding happiness, as it allows you to be focused and maintain a clear mind when staying true to one's dharma. A balance that can be seen in all concepts regarding duality. Just like life and death, they are always in oppositions of one another, and yet they contain an inkling of the other within their design. In my earlier video, I discussed what life and death are heavily associated with, life being heavily associated with change and death being heavily associated with stagnation. But within their foundation, they have the opposite of what they are heavily associated with. Let's take life for instance. In biology, life is categorized as having a metabolism, responding to stimuli, reproducing, adapting through evolution, and lastly, being cellularly organized. Now, the first four certainly incorporate change into their function, but the last one is the complete opposite. To be cellularly organized is to have order and structure, to be stagnant in a sense, that must not succumb to change so that it can function properly with minimal error. The same could be said for death, as it is heavily associated with stagnation, but at its core, it is actually change that allows for new life to blossom. In its initial causation, it releases enormous amounts of chemical reactions that the body would not otherwise do. If a lion dies, it no longer has its shadow, and in time, its form of a lion changes into something else due to the circle of life. The lion itself has ceased to exist, and its cells will soon become stagnant and stiff. Yet in doing so, it allows for its body to be transformed, or better yet, transferred into a different form, and its matter to be consumed by other living creatures, whether it be mushrooms, grass, ants, and/or buzzard. Death may be stagnant by nature, but it is the catalyst of change that is necessary for life to exist. This is the link between the two opposing worlds, and if that link is severed, then both cease to exist. This is what makes life and death inseparable, as they need one another in order to exist, and a balance is needed in order for the world to be at peace. The same could be said for Ralph, who needs these two wolves, both loyalty and wilderness, and if he neglects one of them, he will not only kill that one, but the other, as they are essentially linked to one another through the sled. With that said, all concepts that contain duality need balance in order to maintain inner and outer peace. But some of you might be asking yourself, why must we have this duality? Is this not a hindrance? Why are we made like this? And you wouldn't be wrong, it is a hindrance when left unchecked. But when you obtain the knowledge and wisdom to understand yourself, you can begin to exercise your internal wolves that are desperately in need of your guidance. This brings the second set of word, counsel and wise. Two words that don't seem connected, but are heavily intertwined with one another. And in fact, I will need to dissect the word counsel in order to explain what wise actually means. Now, counsel has many different definitions, but I'll be using this one to give professional help and advice to someone to resolve personal and psychological problems. Note the key word within this definition is actually professional. Now, in this context, the word professional refers to someone that is an expert within a certain school of thought and has the knowledge to help guide a person in a specific situation that pertains to their profession of expertise. But how does this help us to understand wise? Well, let's observe a famous scene from Jurassic Park and how they demonstrated this idea of a council. At the beginning of the film, John, the owner of the park, gathered experts from different fields of study to get their opinion on the matter of opening a park with dinosaurs. He brings in a financial expert, a paleontologist, a paleobotanist, and a chaostician, who all specialize within their field of study, and when asked of their opinions regarding a dinosaur park, they give their professional advice. 3 of the 4 advised him that it was a bad idea, while the other one told him it was a great idea. All of them were genuine in their opinion, and to be fair, the financial expert was right. It would be a great idea for making money. But his school of thought did not allow him to see the problems that would occur later on. However, the other schools of thought were able to see what he could not, for he did not have the knowledge of how things might play out. This is what wisdom truly means. To integrate different schools of thought to pinpoint the truth and foresee future events that may occur, and to act in accordance with this collective knowledge, despite what you might be inclined to feel at that very moment. And when Ralph is able to couple this wisdom with the two wolves at the core of who he is able to find the balance within himself that allows him to fulfill his function and ultimately enables him to find a virtuous purpose that his wolves can now chase down. At the end of the day, we all have an internal conflict within us, but when we learn to overlay different schools of thought over each other, we start to see universal truths that are interwoven into each other, and we gain a new insight into a new synthesized idea. Remember, truths are consistent, while lies are inconsistent. For instance, 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. This is true because it is consistent and will never be anything else. Whereas if I were to make the statement that the US is constantly raining, it would be a lie, for it is not constantly raining within the US, even if it does sometimes. And if we can find these consistencies throughout different disciplines, it only highlights the patterns of laws that will point us closer towards these universal truths. Throughout this video, I use different schools of thoughts to explain confusing and complex ideas, whether it be DNA, computer code, biology, evolution, Hinduism, math, football, boxing, war, physics, Gnosticism, etymology, art, technology, and of course philosophy. This is what it means to have a liberal arts education that can free one's mind, whether you obtain this knowledge through an institution or throughout your life. But when you synthesize and utilize these different disciplines together, you unlock wisdom, the guiding light that allows us to understand ourselves and the world around us so that we can accept ourselves, both flaws and all, and ultimately find a virtuous purpose that is worthy of pursuing. In the end, I'm imperfect, and that's alright. I will never be perfect, and that's not wrong. There's no one I'd rather be than me. In conclusion, Wreck-It Ralph is heavily steeped in philosophical thought, mainly Plato's theory of forms, that bleeds into other disciplines. Now, I was going to make a major point on the mechanics behind the film's respawn system, but seeing as how long this video already is, I decided to leave it up to you, the audience, to decipher the hidden message. I believe that you have the knowledge and wisdom to see past the shadow of this concept and understand its essence of what it is trying to convey to you. At the end of the day, Wreck-It Ralph incorporates many different schools of thoughts within the story, but at the core of its moral themes lies Plato's philosophy and how this world is not what it seems to be. If you made it this far, I just wanted to say thank you for watching it all the way through. It means a lot to me. If you want to continue the discussion, go ahead and comment down below and see where the conversation goes. It's important that we allow our thoughts to strengthen, flourish, change, and synthesize with one another. And please, if you could, spread the word of this video. It would be greatly appreciated, and it would encourage me to do more videos in the future at a faster rate.